public service Zoom meeting. I want to thank everybody for coming on, city councilors for joining us as well, and certainly for our administrative assistant, Ryan, for setting this all up. Mute the line. I just want to read this into this is a different meeting than we normally do. I just wanted to read this into record. Can you mute the lines? Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Just nod if you can. All right, Michael says yes. All right, I just wanted to read this. Today we're relying on Governor Baker's March 12th executive order that allows remote participation by all the members of this public body and suspends the requirements that a quorum of the body needs to physically be there, present at the specified meeting and location. We, the city councilors, are allowed to participate by this conference call via Zoom. The city councilors will certainly let Ryan know if we have any technical difficulty, and we certainly can participate in any votes that we need scheduled for this evening. And this is in regards to Massachusetts General Laws 30A, Section 20, that Governor Baker's March 12th executive order suspended. Let's see here. First on the agenda, we have a mayor appointment of Mr. Jose Bayron to serve as member of the Parks and Rec Commission. And we do have Jose on, so if Ryan, if you could unmute Mr. Bayron.
I have to, there you go.
Okay, Mr. Bayron, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Right.
Yes.
Nice to meet you over Zoom.
Yeah, nice to meet you guys.
So what happens in the public service meeting is
Right.
you got appointed by the good mayor to serve on the Parks and Rec Department, which is a great department, especially with your background with athletics and being from the city of Holyoke. So what we do is,
Right.
we as city council do, is we bring you in and we ask you any questions. You give us an opening statement. You tell us why you want to be a part of this committee, that sort of thing. And afterwards, we on the Public Service Committee will take a vote, and that vote will then go to the full City Council for a recommendation. So I guess having said that, tonight, as you see in front of us, we have I'm City Councilor at Large James Leahy. We have Terry Murphy, who's with us. We also have Rebecca Lisi, who's on the Public Service. We also have Libby Hernandez, who's also on the Public Service Subcommittee. We also have Joe McGivern, and we have Ryan Allen, our administrative assistant. That's from the city. So having said that, maybe if you just want to give us kind of an update about your background and that sort of thing. And we were provided with your updated resume today, which had the address change, which was good.
Yeah.
Here in Holyoke. And we'll go on from there. So feel free.
So I moved back here about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I bought a condominium over on County Road. And prior to that, I was in Northampton for 18 years. I sold my condo there and moved here. So I was always in touch with Holyoke. I grew up in Holyoke and I loved Holyoke. And, I felt that when I came back here, I like to, be in a position where I can, do something for Holyoke, for the city of Holyoke and be a part of it. I grew up in Holyoke when I was very young. I went to John J. Lynch, Holyoke High. And back in the days, we weren't big into video games. We weren't big into computer stuff and all that. So our form of entertainment was being in the parks, playing handball, basketball, stuff like that. Nowadays, I don't see a lot of that, and it's really sad that the kids nowadays prefer to be playing video games or inside the house or doing other stuff rather than being active. So I like to sort of see that same arena back then, that we had back in the 80s, where there was more kids outside, and something to drive them out there. Back in the days, handball was really popular in Holyoke, and there was, tournaments everywhere, and we had kids out there competing and, you know, uh, maintaining their active, composure and the in the outdoors, rather than sitting inside playing on social media or whatever. So I like to sort of be a part of trying to bring that back, and trying to sort of be more proactive in getting kids out there and into the parks and stuff like that, whether it be basketball, maybe bringing back the game of handball, anything that sort of uh, motivates them to get them outside and stuff like that. And I just like to be a part of that. I like to be a part of that change. I enjoyed it when I was in my early teens, in the 80s and stuff like that. It was great. I loved it. And my philosophy is that if you're out there playing basketball, if you're out there doing handball, whatever, then you're not committing a crime. You're not doing drugs. You're sort of steering away from that because something else is occupying your mind. So that for me, that's a huge plus. And that's one of the big reasons why I like to get involved in the Parks and Rec.
Okay, just kind of give you an update too. I have in my notes here that you and there's one other commissioner and there's other spots open. You're going to be the governing body over the Parks and Rec. So essentially, you'll be pretty much the supervisor, Terry Shepard, and you also have a lot of control over the parks, and also one of the things that is debated, somewhat throughout the year at the city council, are the fees to the parks, and so what we have to do is make a fair balance with the Holyoke people that are using it and the outside people that are using it. That's
right.
We'll talk more about that down the road. At this time, do any of the councilors have any questions or statements? Rebecca, I saw your hand first. Councilor Lisi.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your interest in this position, Jose.
Yes.
I was going through your resume and it seems like you are a tech guy.
Yeah, I've been in technology for about 26 years. I was with the district attorney's office for 13 years as an IT director. That's where I got the bulk of my experience in IT. So it's been my drive for a very long time.
Yeah. So just out of curiosity, again, what I'm looking at in your resume seems it's a little bit more on the back end of all like the tech stuff, like the real like hardware and the networks
Right.
is what I gather. But is there a way you think that we could actually use like technology and like the interface of social media that, as you mentioned in your initial remarks, that the youth are really plugged into their devices. So do you think that there's ways that we can utilize, where children are already, plugged in to build more interest in getting outdoors and creating a link to the outside? What's your take on that at this point in time?
So I think that when I was growing up, and this is in my experience, when I was too young to play sports and do stuff, I was a spectator. So I was out there visualizing, and it inspired me to give it a shot. It inspired me to try. So in my thinking, if we get more people out there, more people involved, whether it be older people, younger people, it doesn't matter. It's not an age thing. I think that kids will be more curious to see what it's like, to join in and get involved. And I think that's a big plus right there. But it's really going to be about them visualizing what we're doing and the fun that we're having out there for them to get involved.
If I could just follow up, I think that one of the things that I hear all the time from folks, people don't have a good grasp in general of the services that we are providing. For example, there was, free ice skating, or it's, dollar rentals for the ice skates. And I think at some point in time, we're considering shutting down the ice park the little skating rink area because we weren't getting enough people utilizing that service. And we are providing really great services through our parks department. And I think that we have to face difficult decisions sometimes because they're not utilized to the extent that would make it worth the city to keep those services open and accessible. So, I definitely think that social media needs to be something that, in my opinion, again, the Parks Department needs to have much more of a presence, an online presence, making sure that the website itself is presenting all the services that the parks are providing, and then also just like the hours and that gate rental is $1. Like, come on down.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, so it's funny because social media can burn you, and it can also be utilized for good. It could also be utilized to get the word across, for advertising, and to get kids involved. But it can also burn you because kids get addicted to social media. I mean, it's as a kid texting all day long, that's part of an addiction. And so, yeah, social media can be used for a lot of good stuff. And I don't think it's utilized the way it should be right now. I think we should definitely employ it a little bit more and get more involved with what we can do with social media. So you are definitely correct in what we should be doing.
Thanks. And then if you have that skill set in some way and can bring that to the table, and always keep like an eye, it may be social media, it may be other, things that happen in terms of tech and building awareness and access. But if you have that skill set and can bring that to the table, I think that's really valuable.
Absolutely. That would be huge. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jimmy, you're muted. Jim, you're muted.
Thank you. I was just saying I agree with Councilor Lisi about the social media part. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay, Councilor Murphy, I see you up there.
Yeah, Jose, thank you for your interest in serving on the Parks and Recreation. You got two city councilors here who have recently been just on the Parks and Recreation Commission. So a couple of things. Number one, you're absolutely correct. And there is a movement, and we had actually done some renovations on a handball court at the Jim Jackson Court, basketball courts and handball court on South Canal Street.
Right.
Last summer, we had a tournament, and there was quite an interest as we had people demonstrating, and I can't think of the two people, it's a husband and a wife, and they're very active, and they want to get involved.
I know who they are.
You know who I mean, right?
Yes, Will and his wife, Ortiz. I can't remember her name. Right.
I think you're correct, though. But there's definitely interest, and we've done some renovations. We are looking to expand and make it a more actual full handball court.
Yep.
But we didn't have enough funding to do the entire thing. We did some improvements that made it safer, but not the way they totally wanted it. But and I think if they were in a position to sponsor things, I think you could get interest and have people come and play, and then we could do other things. I agree wholeheartedly. And I think some of the things that go on is that we need to, and there's a history in Holyoke, and that once we get through June, then the summer programs are over and we go to fall. But I think, when kids are out of school, obviously, unfortunately, they're out of school right now, way too long. But we can have programs that go on. I run a baseball league my last seven summers from July to middle of August, and have had anywhere from 80 to 100 kids. So there's definitely an opportunity if we provide an incentive, information for parents. And believe me, if it took me a while to reach out and get enough people to spread the word. And also the other thing I would like to encourage you to think about, and this is something, again, going back to when you were probably young, we had the gyms open and parks programs in the gyms at night at the schools. And I know their schools have had other things going on, but I think we need to find a way, and I've been saying this for the last 6 or 7 years, if not before, we need to find a way to get the schools to recognize that having parks programs in the gyms at night really supports the educational background that those kids need. I mean, they get friends, they get to hang out, they get to be in a good location, they get to have adult supervision. So I encourage you to look at those options as well, and be aggressive and come ask for as much as you want. you're not going to get it all, but the more you ask for, the better chance you get to get more. And I wholeheartedly endorse that concept. And thank you for your willingness.
I was a part of that when I was growing up over in the flats. One of the schools there used to open up at night.
Yep.
And we actually it excited us. It was like we sat there staring at the clock, waiting for them to open, and we go in and we play handball, basketball, and it was a place for the kids to go, and it was amazing. And then, like you said, over the years, it just sort of faded away. A lot of things faded away. And we can bring these things back because they were effective back then, and they worked. And like you said, getting kids off the streets at night, it's huge. I mean, especially in this drug infested, time of our lives, where there's so much out there that's bad. So I think that's definitely a plus if we can bring that back. I don't see why we shouldn't.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor McGivern?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jose, thank you, and we appreciate and thank you for stepping forward. I checked your resume too, and I think we'd like to say thank you for serving. I noticed 2 honorable discharges. We appreciate that also.
Thank you.
I enjoyed your comments so far, and I don't want to be redundant here because I think, Councilor Lisi talking about the tech in your resume and your experience is wonderful. I agree with that. It's a tool maybe to get kids into the parks.
Sure.
Yeah. I kind of like your comments too, is let's get them in there and turn social media off, and let's start doing what kids do. The difference between me and you is I think as far as what our parks are for, I think are exactly the same, except I grew up in the 60s, and it wasn't handball, Terry. It was basketball. It was baseball. Not always organized baseball. It was playing baseball. We can make our own games. And I grew up at Aubrey Field, and we were there, 10 months out of the year doing something. And I say 10 months because back then we didn't have to go to Fitzpatrick to go ice skating. We had our own ice skating rink, and we skated outside, and it was wonderful. Yeah. I think you get the gist of that. If you build it, they will come. Oh, yeah. And we got to get them to turn off the social media and start using we have some wonderful parks. So I have 2 questions, or one question that's 2 parts. Currently, our organization of parks is Parks and Rec is a little bit separated. It used to be the same, where the DPW now is in charge of the maintenance, in charge of renovating, in charge of projects, physical projects for the parks. They have a good relationship with Terry Shepard and with the commission, but there's also rental of parks, which comes through the Parks Department itself. Can you elaborate what your thoughts are about that? Is how to keep a good relationship with the DPW, and how to rent out parks like Roberts Field, to be able to get some revenue for the city to pay for what we have to do, but at the same time make sure that Hoyokers come first. Well,
anytime you have collaboration of 2 agencies, sort of like Parks and Rec and DPW and stuff like that, for me, it's they need to work together. It's not going to happen. Nothing's going to happen if you don't work together. We don't want to develop, a bad stigma between the 2 where, we're asking them do this, do that without thinking of, their schedule, what they have on their plate and stuff like that. So it's more of a collaboration. We need to work with them. We need to understand what they're working on, projects and stuff like that. We need to sort of be in that flow of communication. And I agree with you. We need to sort of figure out as far as funding and what's out there, what we can do to bring funds and stuff like that to sort of accomplish certain projects that do not fall under DPW or stuff that doesn't pertain to them in regards to maintenance and stuff like that. So I think that the major scope of that is really good communication between the 2 departments.
Thank you, and welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Any other counselors? Okay, Lydia, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say welcome to Mr. Bayron, and I reviewed your resume, and it brings such an array of skills to the table. Like Councilor Terry Murphy mentioned, both Councilor Murphy and myself come from the Holyoke Parks and Rec. I just exited from there from chairwoman, and it's just a very fantastic service that you're going to be providing to our community. It looks like you're very well equipped, and I just wanted to mention Holyoke being the melting diversity, right, of different cultures that we have here. It makes it even more beautiful, and I think that you're going to be a great fit for this position. Thank you so much for volunteering.
Thank you, and I hope that I'm actually, it's strange because I feel like I'm looking from the inside and out. At one point, I was looking from the outside in, but based on the fact that I grew up in Holyoke, and I was a part of all the activities that we had outside at one point. I can understand how kids feel, and I'm trying to sort of. I like to bring it back to that era, to that 1980s era, where everything was outside, and you didn't see people walking around texting on their phones. It was just an amazing time in our lives. Yeah. And it's awesome to bring it back. And I'm going to tell you, I'm 55 years old Friday. I still play handball. I still play basketball, and I'm grateful that I can still be active. So I'll be the first one out there in a handball court, swinging the ball.
Nice. One of the big goals before I got elected to city council and that I was working with the Parks and Rec is to get that pool back open in Holyoke. We need that pool for the kids. They really deserve it. Yeah. So I hope that you can, if everything goes well, that you can work really hard on that.
Yep. We had a lot of pools back then in the 80s. A lot of pools were open at the time, and they've slowly faded away. A lot of things faded away. So.
Thank you.
We had 6 pools in the 60s.
Yep. And then in the 80s, we had a little bit less, but we still had pools open. And what do we have today? So
exactly.
There's a trend there. There's a trend. It's a trend that we want to bring back.
I think Councilor McGivern and Jose should get their own little podcast.
I agree.
Anyways, any other questions? I don't see any hands. So what happens from here is at our next virtual city council meeting, we on the public service committee will make a recommendation to the full city council. And I don't see any barriers from having you join this. In fact, I already saw it's on your resume already. So after that, that's a good, actually, Joe, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Usually what I say is then you go down and visit our city clerk and she'll read you the oath and you raise your right hand. How's that happening now? Is she doing that over Zoom?
I think you're going to have to ask Brenner that one, but I know you call the office and they'll give you the current instructions of how to be sworn in. I think you can catch up to the signing later.
All right. So we have some time to worry about that. Jose, do you have any questions for any of the counselors?
No, I think you guys, overall, I'm going to tell you, I think you guys are doing a great job. And from listening to you guys, I was very pleased because everybody here had the same thought in their head of going forward and making the changes. And that's great. There's no opposition, there's no, you got to deal with this person and get through them and stuff like that. Everybody's sort of on the same page, which is great.
That's great. All right, so I'll entertain a motion to confirm
the appointment and approve the appointment.
Second? Somebody second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Joe?
I'm not a member anymore, Jim.
Oh, that's right.
You, Libby, and Rebecca these days.
I was wondering why Joe's not talking. He loves to talk. Okay. All right.
Me and Jerry are here for the fun.
Yeah, the vote went 3-0, so congratulations. So as I said, the next move, we'll bring this up to the full city council meeting, and you feel free to watch it. And you feel free as an IT guy to make some suggestions what we can do better. But thank you so much for your service. Feel free to just call the rest of the night, or you can get off.
All right. Well, I'll go tend to my supper.
You're okay.
Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
James, take a motion off item number 2, a mayoral appointment of Mrs. Elana Aubrey,
So
Chair of
moved.
the Historic Commission of the City of Holyoke.
Motion to take up off the table.
Second.
All in favor?
Second.
Aye.
All right. So just to get started, we got your resume, we got your information, just so the people at home know what the Historic Commission does, because it's a very important commission in the city of Holyoke, as Holyoke is a very old community. It was established back in after my birthday, November 20th, 1972. And what it comes down to is it goes after the Mass General Law, which is Section 40, Section 8D, which also gives 5 different responsibilities that each commissioner is responsible for: conducting research on historic buildings, cooperating with the state on conducting surveys and reporting at different sites, coordinating with other preservation organizations, and also you have to maintain, or the city maintains, membership of not less than 3 or more than 7 members appointed by the mayor and confirmed by us, the good city council. And that chapter also includes a lot of other things too. From memory, it makes recommendations to the mayor, the city council, also the Massachusetts State Historic Commission, and he also responsible for holding hearings if somebody's going to give any grants, and also hiring staff, and also accepting grants and gifts. So having said that, you saw the last interview. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. Counselors here will ask you some questions, and we'll go from there. And you are
Okay. Okay. Hi, my name is Elana. It's actually pronounced Elana, not Elena. So I'd just like to put that out there. I next month will have lived in Holyoke for 4 years. I bought my first ever home here. I guess the sense of service and obligation is pretty strong for me. I am a clinical social worker, and I think one of the tenets of social work as a profession is something that I think a lot of people don't recognize, is what does it mean to give back and how do you give back? And it's not just with providing therapy or connecting people to services in that way. It is, you know, what can I be doing to give back to the community that I'm a part of, and how do I exhibit that and live it for myself? And so I think the combination of my professional life with, you know, how I was raised with, you know, a tremendous respect for the history, not just of my family, but you know, where I grew up, and just always having a sense of the value of knowing what happened before you were there. That's always been very instilled in me. I think since coming to Holyoke, I've definitely thought about different ways that I might be able to get involved in sort of, I don't see this as a public life kind of thing, certainly not along the lines of city council, but, you know, what could I be doing that would have a little bit more official role to it in the community, other than being nice to my neighbors and helping out, you know, when a roof blows off, and, you know, trying to help families in that way. But you know, I think from my family, I have learned a tremendous amount. Everybody in my family was very involved in, you know, telling stories. I have a brother who can remember basically every detail of everything. So he is an encyclopedia. So there's never a shortage of reference. And I just have always been fascinated by what came before. And Holyoke, I think, is just an endlessly fascinating historical place. And I would love to see more opportunity for people to learn and really have that be a part of the conversation in talking about Holyoke moving forward, and how do we rely on the history of the city as a way to move forward, either looking at things from, you know, a lens that says, well, we did this, it didn't work out, how can we kind of piece together what might be moving forward for the city, but reflecting on elements of its past that clearly are fascinating. I mean, I think the first industrial plans, the planned industrial city and the canals, I mean, all of that is truly fascinating material. And, you know, all the buildings in the city have a story to tell. And I think there are endless ways that we could, I mean, you were talking about using technology, but I mean, I think there are just endless ways to incorporate the stories of Holyoke to get people on board and see what Holyoke looks like now, as well as what helped shape what Holyoke is now, if that makes sense. So, you're muted.
I'm not gonna get used to that part.
Okay, I know, I did the same thing.
All right, I have Councilor Lisi up next.
Thank you. Elana, thanks so much for your interest in the position, and for also, you know, with only a few years a part of the city, becoming so actively involved and taking up a bit of your macro practice as a social worker here locally. A couple of things I want to note is just listening to what you said in these comments, it's almost like I hear you talking about creating a story core of sorts. So it's not just the buildings, and I think that you know, I'm guilty of this, and I think that for the most part, we've always thought of the Historic Commission as being the bricks and mortar of the city, and how to preserve the physical history and the architecture of the city. But what I hear you talking about is a little bit more of like preserving the stories that make up this place. And you know, given the comments that Councilor Hernandez made earlier about the diversity of this community, I think that would be a real gift. And I think that there's been, you know, similar efforts in the past, especially when we think about, you know, what is the standing display at the visitor center. There's a lot of history, like the narrative history of the workers who built the canals, and also the immigrant history of the community. So I would love to see more stories come out and more community engagement with those stories. And it sounds like that's the track that you're on already.
Yeah.
I don't know if you speak to that at all before I go on.
Sure. No, I think, you know, we have a slight window of that with Holyoke Media, and that element of interviewing people and finding out kind of what's fresh and new in Holyoke. But even, you know, just this past fall, I think I went to the Wisteria Hearst, and they had a very small exhibit, granted, but it was about Blacks in Holyoke. And, you know, I was fascinated by what I saw there, but it was just this incredibly small snippet of life in Holyoke during a certain period of time. I think it was the 50s and 60s, but I can't remember entirely. But, you know, there are hundreds of other stories to be told. And, you know, I just think that one of the fascinating components of history is the way it can be connected to contemporary issues. I mean, people are people, and they just live in different times, and we adapt to what we have around us. But, you know, the stories stay alive if we tell them. And, you know, I think that's kind of in a nutshell what is always fascinating about history. So.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think some kind of StoryCorps, or, you know, I don't know about a podcast necessarily. I don't know if I'm, you know, equipped to do all that, but certainly, you know, the StoryCorps sort of modality, I think, would be fascinating. Sure.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun.
You know, the more I learn about people who were born and raised in Holyoke and then left for a few years and came back, and now they have kids who are living in Holyoke, you know, I think that there are ways to connect multi-generations. Yeah, I think that would be great.
Great. So I want to ask you or mention two other things before I give up my time here. Number one, I'm about how much professional development the Historic Commission has taken taken advantage of. I know at the state level there is the State Historic Commission. Councilor Leahy kind of started mentioning, some of that in his opening remarks. But I know for a fact that they do technical trainings on how to think about creating policy for historic preservation and creating a balance between new development and new architecture, while also thinking about ways that we can reasonably preserve the historic architectures in place. So I would love for you to just keep an eye on how much technical and professional development that board is getting.
Sure.
And if you need to be the one that's like raising your hand and saying, hey, how about we do a training about this, or how about we engage like Mass Historic and have them talk to us about what are best practices these days on whatever issue we might be dealing with here. I would love to see, or just have somebody ensuring that we are continuing to update our knowledge in that area.
Sure.
And then finally, the Historic Commission, I think, has an interest in revamping the demolition delay ordinance. And we have, in the years that I've been on the city council, revamped it once. And as far as I understand, it creates a 6-month delay on a property that's slated for a demolition. And of course, there's all these different contingencies. But one of the other things that I think needs to happen there is, so we can put a delay out for 6 months, but then all we're doing is delaying the inevitable in those 6 months. And I think that we, in some ways, need a historic commission or some related board that is actually fundraising or seeking out developers to take on the historic property, either preserving the historic property or a new developer coming in that would make use of the historic property in that 6-month window that the demolition delay offers. I think, we could put a 6-month delay on something, but if we're not actually using those 6 months effectively to find out what else can be done, who else is out there that can help, whether it's, again, fundraising across the community or other communities that might have an interest in a particular building because of
Right.
But I think that the demolition delay may not need to be revamped. I mean, as the chair of ordinance, I would be happy to look at it again. But I'm skeptical about whether or not it needs to be revamped, because I don't know if we're actually making the most use of the ordinance the way it is written today. Mm-hmm. So I think that's another thing to consider.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, these are terms that I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about. So, but I absolutely, assume that if I'm appointed to the commission, that, I'll be learning about these things and being given some, documentation to review, and certainly around the process and the policy, that would be, the learning curve that I would have to deal with. So can I just ask a quick question? I just want to make sure. So the interview for the former person, that was for like the head commissioner of Parks and Rec. This is just appointed to the commission, correct?
I believe that other person was just appointed to the body.
Oh, okay. Because the way the language sounded, it sounded like you used the word commissioner, and I was like, that's not what I signed up for. I just wanted to make sure, double sure. So
no, just an acting member of the body.
Okay, good.
I'm sorry, Councilor Leahy, I may be talking over you. I see your lips moving, but I'm not hearing you.
I was just explaining the difference between the boards and the commissioners.
Oh. So
no, you're in the right spot, and judging by your resume, I think that you're in the right spot. And listening to you today, I think you're the ideal. Any more questions?
Do I have any? Oh. All
right. I see Terry Murphy, Councilor Murphy, then I have Joe.
Yes, Elana, first of all, thank you for putting your name out and trying to make a difference. And along the lines of a couple of things that Councilor Lisi brought up, and maybe it's being done, but I haven't seen it, and maybe I'm just missing it. But I think one of the things that would be good so that we don't worry about a 6-month delay is if we were able to put basically a listing of all those buildings that we feel have historic significance, get a status report on where they are, what could be done, and how much it might cost, and then prioritize those in terms of what we can do to preserve as many of them as possible, and not get to the point where we're going to be demolishing. Because there are so many buildings we have to demolish. They may have some historical significance, but unfortunately, they're so far gone that to bring it back would be bringing something totally different back and far beyond our financial means. So I would encourage you, and if I'm not mistaken, Emily, you're also looking to be on the historical commission, right? No, Emily, Christine?
Terry,
you're also looking to be on it. So I would encourage both of you, assuming you're both appointed, which I hope you will be, to look at getting an entire directory of historic buildings that we need to take a look at. How do we preserve them? What their status is? Seek funding from various sources in terms of what we can do. Because I think if we do that up front, then the 6-month ordinance means far less, because we're going to be dealing with things proactively rather than reacting, because now we've gotten too far down the road. And the last thing I'll tell you is, I know I saw some of the people that were involved in the article at Wisteria Hearst. Is that the Wisteria Hearst or the library about?
It was at the Wisteria Hearst.
Okay. And I can tell you, I knew some of the people that are there, and we had a vibrant community, and hopefully we'll have a vibrant community again. But there's a lot of quality that came out of those neighborhoods, and they were very much a significant part of that. So thank you, and thank you for volunteering.
Sure.
Go. Joe.
I think Ryan muted me. Thank you, Elana. I just want to say up front, welcome. You have my support just on the words that you gave this evening, on the letter of introduction, and everything that you presented to us in your experience. I think you come with the right attitude. Real quick on Rebecca and Terry touched on the demolition delay ordinance. I sponsored the original ordinance, and that 6 months is a two-way street. It's important to have time. I think they both have good thoughts about this, of how we could better use that time to see if there are other options in tearing down, especially in historic building. But at the same time, we're often dealing with the private sector, developers, investors, and reasons that the building is being torn down. And we have to recognize that they have part of the formula is to determine what exactly can be done, because eventually it's their property. So I'm going to take it into a different angle here and just ask you, Wisteria Hearst is one of our finest and prominent historical buildings that we have. It says a lot about the history of Holyoke in so many different ways. Plus, there's access to the public to, not right now, but hopefully pretty soon, to be able to get in to enjoy the exhibits like the one you saw and countless other exhibits. The building, the grounds in the building are owned by the city. And the governance of that building is, I don't think we could get the straight answer from every city councilor sitting here this evening who's in charge. There's a city budget, there's some city people, employees who work there, there's the Friends of Wisteria Hearst, and there's the Historic Commission, and everybody forgets. There are boards that have come and gone. Are you familiar with the management of Wisteria Hearst? And if not, we'll just stop right here.
With the what?
With the management of Wisteria Hearst.
Probably not to the depths of what it sounds like. I think there's a story that Wisteria Hearst tells about itself, and that's kind of what I probably am most aware of. But no, I probably am not as I don't have that other information you're referring to.
That's okay. I think you have the right tools that if you do become involved, because at one time it was the Historical Commission, and they've relinquished some of that responsibility, and we're trying to create a board that makes sense for everybody.
Okay.
Welcome aboard. You certainly have my support, and look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Me too.
Any other counselors have any questions? All right, hearing none. So basically, I think you were on the call for the last gentleman. So basically what we're going to do is going to bring you in front of the full city council. You don't have to be present or online. I don't see any issues. So the city council will make the final choice. And after that, we're going to figure out, we'll get you in contact with the city clerk. You
Okay.
Do you have any questions for us?
Not really. I mean, I really actually kind of like the idea of associating Holyoke a little bit more with the statewide and maybe even the national, historic element, because like I said, I mean, I think most people, if they know of Holyoke, it may just be because we periodically have a story in the national news. But the actual history of the city, I think, is truly fascinating, particularly, in light of, what cities are trying to do, what we're all trying to do around energy use and things like that. So I think, looking at how the city was developed well before its time, and really highlighting that, I think there continue to be ways that we can elicit that history in the modern day. So I'm really looking forward to those kinds of opportunities.
Excellent. One last thing is, my wife grew up about, I don't know, 4 doors down the street from you. It's 78 Nonotuck Street.
Okay.
That area. So I entertain the motion to confirm the good mayor's appointment.
Motion to confirm and approve the appointment.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. And Ryan, our admin, will take a notation of that. And once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So it's okay to leave the meeting?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to entertain somebody to make a motion that we have, right now we have mayor appointment of Christine, is it Berge? You're muted.
I'll make the motion that we take up Christine Berge for discussion.
All in favor? Or do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Emily, I'm muted.
Uh-oh.
You're muted now, Ms. Berge.
Okay. How is everybody tonight?
Thank you.
Doing well.
Good.
You've been on the call and you've been listening to us, right?
Yes, and honestly, I'm very familiar with your proceedings because I've been volunteering since November at City Hall.
All right.
With planning and development under Ben Murphy. So I've actually been reading the files paper by paper, getting to know all the commission workings.
All right. Just so the people at home know, what is exactly a conservation commissioner? My wife was on the conservation commission for over maybe close to 2 decades. Conservation commission is, I think there's 7 members, and
This is historical, though, Jim.
historic. All right, Ryan. Okay, so you saw how the meeting was going. Why don't you give us a little background about yourself, and then we'll have some counselors ask you some questions. Go from there.
Okay, I come from Brooklyn, New York, where I was vice president and ran a graphics company until I won disability a few years ago. And then my daughter flipped a home for us here in Holyoke. So I've lived here in Holyoke since October.
Okay, so your name is Christine, and her name is Emily.
Yes. So I imagine that's why you got Emily's name instead of mine. And I enjoy Holyoke very much, but being the creative person that I am, I didn't want to just sit at home. As lovely as it is here, I wanted to pursue my interests and make a difference. And so I began by volunteering at City Hall. And to my great surprise, they are very understaffed and immediately gave me an office and told me to begin filing. And that's what I've been doing up until the coronavirus. I was filing in room 409 of the annex and got to know quite a bit about commission business and enjoyed that very much. and want to join the Historic Commission because of my art background and history background. I enjoy history quite a bit, and I'm a very creative person and can add quite a bit in many, many different ways creatively.
Excellent. Any counselors have any questions? Rebecca?
Hi. Thanks again for your interest, Ms. Berge. I wanted to just, I mean, you've heard some of the points that I raised when Elana was on the phone about, you know, paying attention to the demo delay and, you know, I know that there's interest in revamping the demo delay, but really, you know, are we actually utilizing that 6 months to make the demo delay worth it? So those are the sorts of issues that I'd like to look forward to. I hear, you know, when I was talking to Elana, her talking about bringing stories to life. You seem to have a visual, I guess, talent. And so could you speak briefly to the ways you could imagine using that skill set in working to amplify or highlight Holyoke's history in some way?
Visual, as well as being able to read the paperwork that I've seen with the commissions, the various Historical Commission, Holyoke and Fairfield Avenue, and seeing how things proceed. The paperwork, how proposals are made, the demos, the demo delays. I'm pretty much, I will not say familiar, but I've read up on quite a bit now, and am familiar with architectural styles. I'm familiar with how important it is to keep history of homes, such as detailing on roofs and mansards, and the different architects that have made the homes important here in Holyoke, and tracing the historic histories back with the homes. And
that's great.
Besides having a history in volunteerism, I have quite an interest in bringing history to life visually, and feel I could add to that in many different ways.
Great. The one last thing that I would say is, given that you're from Brooklyn, I'm a New Yorker myself. My mom's a Brooklyn girl from Nostrand and Avenue Z. And I'm sure you had seen changes over the past 30 years in terms of gentrification. And gentrification is something that we're very watchful of here in Holyoke. I think that we have to figure out a way to improve the city so that we're not growing and pushing communities that have been here for generations now, that they're not being pushed out as we grow and improve. And sometimes I think when there's times that historic preservation can sometimes be at odds with anti-gentrification efforts. And so I'm not sure if you have experience because of the history that you have in Brooklyn, but if you could bring an eye to that, I think that would be really valuable. I don't know if you have anything to say to that.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because in Brooklyn, we did go through many, many problems. And I began living in Brooklyn in 1982, when it really was at its worst, and you were afraid to walk the streets of Brooklyn without getting mugged. And I saw the changes, and I believe that slowly people do want change here in Holyoke. It is a slippery slope to walk because you don't want to tread on toes, but it is possible. And I believe one way, working with Borough Hall, I worked on a volunteer basis with Borough Hall in tourism. And I believe one way to bridge the gap there is the tourism. I believe there is a way to link tourism to bringing the city up, and rather than use the term gentrify, possibly just improving the city and linking tourism to the various historic sites and making all of Holyoke better for it. Having it work more in sync, all of the sites together.
Great. So I'm going to be looking to you as things move forward and checking in on how we're doing in terms of making progress to mitigate those sorts of negative aspects of gentrifying. So thanks so much for your time.
One thing I've learned volunteering at City Hall is how very hard everyone works here to make Holyoke a better place. And it really is a wonderful atmosphere.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I'll yield my time to the chair.
Anybody else have any other questions? Councilor McGivern. Councilor McGivern, you're muted. Kind of like that.
Sorry. I keep telling you you're muted, and I keep forgetting myself. Emily, Christine, welcome aboard. And I saw you shaking your head when we were talking to the previous candidate about Wisteria-Hearst and things like that. And I think you understand and got a good feeling about the demolition delay. I was interested, though, when you were talking about, and it's kind of the closer to the Fairfield Avenue Historic District. When we do create a specific historic district, the Historic Commission is involved, but the actual district, takes over. And what are your thoughts about when, someone says you have to have this type of roof, this type of siding, these type of windows, and the person buys a house and says, I'm not going to do that because I can't afford this, but I can afford that. How do you work with that?
Honestly, I've been attending the Fairfield Commission meetings, and we had a case come up where one of the neighbors was improving or trying to improve, but it wasn't up to regulation and he hadn't gotten the COA for it. And so first a suggestion was made to go and verbally mention this to him, and two members of the commission, the chairman and another, offered to go over and verbally speak to him because no one is of the mind to antagonize. And so they went over and paid him a visit, but I understand that he was not receiving the message that things had to be done a certain way for the historic district. So what I understand to be the next step is to go to either planning and development or the building inspector. So I understand there is a method, but I would never choose to be antagonistic with people. I believe that if you try to explain to them the history of their home and the importance, possibly you can get them on board before you would have to do anything more strong-armed.
Thank you. Well said, and you certainly have my support, and welcome aboard.
Thank you very much.
Libby, I think I saw your hand up.
Hi, Ms. Berge. Welcome, and through the chair, I would like to say that it's just I'm very excited with all these appointments taking place, and that we're adding people that are very interested in our city and how to improve it. And I wanted to ask you a question as it relates to the depopulation of historic downtown and the increasing vacancy in the building stock. What is your take on how to improve and create a more vibrant city of Holyoke during new construction, adding new construction, but keeping the historic essence without losing that? What is your take on it?
I know it's difficult. I have talked to many people in City Hall about this, and I don't believe there's any one direction to go. I believe there probably are many paths that you could take, maybe many steps. One, I believe, simply is picking up garbage. I hear people saying how dirty Holyoke is and how beautiful it used to be. I think simply by picking up things and beautifying in that regard would be a very simple step. Then another thing I think is possibly getting people aware of what the city council and city hall is trying to do. I think many people that I've met just are not aware of all the efforts being made to try to bring Holyoke into a better place. And I think that's important for people to know. I think there are ways to attract people, artists, craftsmen. I think tourism is a big part of it. As I said before, I think many places here could be utilized in a better fashion to bring people in and see what a great atmosphere Holyoke is.
Thank you so much.
It is sad to see the depopulation of downtown, but I will tell you, I grew up in Syracuse, New York, and for years the downtown area struggled there. And when I went back recently in August, I noticed they had transformed the whole downtown area to a very vibrant, beautiful place. And so I do believe it can be done, but I think it has to be done carefully and slowly and possibly baby steps.
Yes, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, in the Bushwick area. And when I visit now is so different. I mean, it has underwent a transformative change,
Yes,
but
yes.
with that said, although it looks beautiful, it also pushed out all the people that live there, and
Yes.
you know, it has placed only people of the same economic levels, and that's something that I will work tirelessly for it not to happen in the city of Holyoke.
Well, are you familiar with Red Hook, Brooklyn?
No.
Red Hook, Brooklyn was where I was serving on the auxiliary for the VFW post 5195. And we had quite a bit of community outreach and community development going on. And Red Hook has become quite a beautiful neighborhood with no one really disenfranchised at all. So I believe it is possible. Getting the people on board, though, with the idea to beautify, I think is key. And making them proud of their attractions.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councilor Lisi?
Thanks. I just want to offer two little bits of information. Ms. Berge, I just wanted to kind of reiterate some of what I said to Elana in terms of the Mass Historic offering a lot of like technical support and you know, related to the question that Councilor McGivern raised about people having some sort of financial hardship to actually make the historic changes that may be required of a historic district.
Yeah.
I think that there's likewise grants that are available, and I think one of the things that our historic commission could be doing is identifying where those grants are in advance, and then helping people fast track, you know, identify which ones they might qualify for and be able to make use of. So I'll just reiterate that Mass Historic is a wealth of information that I would love to see our local board make more use of. And then secondly, you may have heard about this already because it seems like you've been really digging deep into what's going on in the city. But one, you know, anti-displacement effort that the city is taking on is what's called El Corazón de Holyoke, the heart of Holyoke. It's a place-making effort and working to create a visual sense that there's a neighborhood and a community here that cannot be displaced as we develop and grow and bring in new development. So if just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that, and maybe that's something that you would be interested in linking up in, since a lot of the things that you've talked about in terms of the visual and the architectural styles and your work in Red Hook, it seems to overlap with that effort.
That's wonderful. One of the attractions about Brooklyn was that you could walk from one block to the next and see and meet a whole new nationality.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve or confirm.
Motion to confirm and approve the appointment.
Second it.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
You have any questions?
Thank you. Thank you. No, my heartiest thanks, though.
You're muted, Councilor Leahy.
As I said to everybody else, we will move forward with this at the next city council meeting. All right? If you have any questions, feel free to give us a call or send us an email. All right, so let's see here, looking at my list here. Councilor McGivern?
I was saying goodbye to our candidate. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. A nice pleasure to meet all of you, and I hope I see you again in person.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Tell Emily we said hello.
I will.
All right.
Good night.
Let's hear a motion that we have the mayor appointment of Bernice to serve as a member of the Conservation Commission for the City of Holyoke.
Motion to take up for discussion.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so you've been through a bunch of these interviews now, so why don't you tell us about yourself and your background and why you'd like to be a part of this commission?
Okay. I am a native of Holyoke, and I have lived here most of my life. I come from a business background, having worked for the federal government for my career. Retired as manager of a local social security office in the area. I believe in our city and believe in giving back and trying to make it the best city it can be, and hope to continue those efforts. At the moment, I volunteer at Wisteria-Hurst, Mount Tom State Reservation, some local nonprofits, and I've actually served on the Conservation Commission now.
I wanted to know what I would do about the
for
demo delay
18
ordinances.
years. And I frankly am not certain why I'm back to this spot, but we're here tonight. So I guess I would just close by saying, with my business background on the commission, one of my goals is to always try and find that delicate balance between the needs of conservation, but also the needs of the business community, and how can those two things be accomplished. And I'm close with that.
Bernice, when you worked for the Social Security, did you work with a gentleman named John Daly?
I actually did. That goes back a while.
I bought John Daly's house.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, my first election, it was formerly, I think, the Dwight's house. They bought it for the Dwight.
Yep.
Dwight and John Daly, then myself. And I met him when I was going door to door for my first election back in 1998.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I see Councilor Lisi had her hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to say thanks so much for your interest in this position, Bernice. I know that you've done a ton of work and you're very familiar with the proceedings of the Conservation Commission. And I know that you are always mindful of that balance between preserving the green jewels that Holyoke has in terms of outdoor recreational activities and green spaces, and then balancing that with the needs that we have to bring businesses into the city. So I am happy to vote in favor of your reappointment this evening.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any other questions? Councilor McGivern.
Real quick, Mr. Chair, and I'm not muted. Denise, I don't have to ask the question because you already answered it. Both your background in business, but your understanding of what conservation regs are and your understanding of the importance to business to be able to develop is part of the more difficult things that the commission takes on from time to time. You have a great conservation director to work with, and wish you a lot of luck, and thank you for coming forward.
Thank you.
I was just corrected by one of my children. It was the Whiting's house before. They listen to everything. Any other counselors? Any other questions or statements? No. I'll entertain a motion to approve the mayor's reappointment.
Motion to confirm and approve the appointment of Bernice Bowler.
All in favor?
Aye.
I see Libby saying yes.
No, I seconded and then aye.
Awesome. All right, Bernice, thank you so much for volunteering. And you know the drill.
Thank you.
I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernice. Have a
Good
good
luck.
night.
Take care now. All right, can somebody make a motion to take off item 5, which is a mayor appointment of Dr. Michael Dodge to serve as member of the Conservation Commission for the City of Holyoke. As I just got notified that he sent his resume to all of us on here. We see you down here, Mr. Dodge. So somebody make that motion.
Motion to take up item number 5, which is the appointment of Michael Dodge to the Historic Commission.
Second.
Conservation Commission.
All right, okay. So Michael, walk us through your background and questions.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time this evening to meet. As I believe Councilor Leahy mentioned, I did send along my resume, not sure if it was needed since the last time we went through the reappointment process, but thought it would just be helpful to have. So my name is Michael Dodge. I have been a resident in the city of Holyoke since 2013 when we bought our first house. And have lived here since then. I've served on the Holyoke Conservation Commission since 2015. I previously served as vice chair and then stepped into the role of chair for the last couple of years as we went out to search for a new conservation director. For me, outside of kind of my work on the Conservation Commission, I work at American International College in Springfield, overseeing a program and being a faculty member, but I'm also involved in kind of the local Holyoke community. I serve as treasurer for the Homework House, kind of nonprofit organization. And for me, Conservation Commission has really been, I think, as Bernice mentioned, kind of balancing the needs and ensuring that we are conserving and taking care of our environment and our green spaces, and recognizing that Holyoke is in a unique position because of its geography and topography, and where the water and where our sources of water and wetlands are. And so it has been a pleasure and an honor to serve for the last 5 or so years in this commission.
Excellent. Any councilors have any questions? Councilor McGivern.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
You've been there. You're in the trenches. I'm not too sure why this was referred to committee. I think it might have been a councilor that had a question, but the truth is, you've already been, vetted through this once. We know you. Your resume speaks for itself. You've done a great job. I hope you're going to help Bernice break in, but I think she's a step ahead already. But
she definitely keeps us all on our toes.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, I agree with Councilor McGivern. A city councilor wanted everybody to go to committee, and so I don't have any questions. Does anybody else have any questions? No? All right, Michael, we're going to confirm it. At least somebody's going to make a motion to.
I'll make a motion to, well, before I actually make that motion, I'll just say thank you for your service, and we look forward to having you there again. So motion to confirm and appoint Mr. Dodge.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
All right, somebody make a motion to take off the last item, mayor appointment of Mr. Jeffrey Trask to serve as the emergency management director for the city of Holyoke.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Do we have him? Oh, there he is. Popped up there. Hi, Jeff. How are you? I think you're on mute.
Just in delay.
I can't hear him at all.
I think that he's communicating, although the visibility is through the computer, the communication is through the phone. So you just have to unmute the phone. Or Ryan, can you please unmute his, there you,
Oh, no, I was muted by the host.
yeah, there you go.
Okay.
All right,
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
All right, cool.
You've been sitting on the meeting, so why don't you give us a background and tell us why the mayor appointed you this and what expertise you have for this position. It's obviously an extremely important position.
Yeah, no problem. So to start off with, so the reason the mayor appointed me is because I've been serving on the fire commission here in Holyoke for the past 2 years. I was appointed in, I want to say, the spring of 2018. Been living here and once, so when the COVID-19 happened, because emergency management lived in the fire department, he had relied on my expertise to help in the initial weeks of the COVID-19 response, just to provide some guidance regarding not only just, that incident command structure, what it looks like for a large scale incident, but also to act as a liaison and to help provide assistance with getting state resources until, the response had settled into a routine and was being managed on a day-to-day basis at the city hall. So it was quickly discovered that, even though the fire chief acted as the emergency management director, the fire chief has responsibilities with frontline response that could be in conflict with that of the emergency management director. So upon his recommendation, and because of my background in emergency management, he had asked the mayor if I could serve as the emergency management director. He would surrender the stipend, I would get the stipend, and serve in that capacity. Obviously, because COVID-19 required such an intense response, the mayor appointed, his chief of staff to serve as emergency management director. I had been providing advice to that operation over the past 3 months, I guess, at this point now. And it's at a point now where they feel that, they can make, because of the structures they have in place, they can make that transition and that appointment, to me as the emergency management director. So that's kind of how that played out. Just to give you some idea of my background, I've lived in Holyoke for the past 3 years. I moved here in 2017. Grew up in Chicopee, went to Holyoke Catholic High School, graduated class of 98. So I've always had an affinity for the city, and my wife and I chose to purchase a house here and live here and raise our 10-month-old son here in Holyoke. My background is in emergency management for almost 20 years now, having started right out of college working as the emergency management director full-time for the city of Chicopee. Did that for a couple of years and then was recruited for a position at the state where I worked as a program manager for Mass Emergency Management Agency, primarily dealt with business continuity for state government, along with running programs and grant programs in particular for the communities in the Commonwealth. So did that for 7 years and was recruited as the full-time emergency management director for MIT, was in Cambridge for 3 years. Unfortunately, had the experience of living through the Boston Marathon bombings and also the active shooter incident on MIT's campus, where I served as the EOC manager, Emergency Operations Center manager for that incident, and also handled crisis communication for it. The commute was getting a little arduous going into Cambridge every day. I was riding the van pool, so an opportunity came up at Mass Mutual to head up their resilience department, which included emergency management, business continuity, disaster recovery, and some IT functions. So I did that for 3 years until I was recruited by ISO New England to head up their emergency management and business continuity here in Holyoke. So that's my experience. I'm also a certified emergency manager and also have the highest level of certification for business continuity. So honestly, being on the fire commission has been a great way to give back to my community. I would love nothing more than to leverage my experience in this field to help out my hometown. So that's really the motivation behind this, and was very flattered when the fire chief recommended that I serve. To surrender his stipend to allow me to serve in this capacity for the city.
Yes, and I also want to know, I did talk to the chief, and he highly recommended you to me for this position as well. Just so the people at home know that this position does a lot. Some of the things it does is assesses hazards and prepares plans, respond to all different types of emergencies in order to minimize the risk of people and property. You will meet with public safety officials, private companies, general public to get recommendations regarding any sort of plans. You're going to optimize any response training programs from staff, volunteers, and other responders. Prepare and analyze damage assessments following disasters. I would encourage anybody at home that wants further information to certainly go onto the city's website and take a look at that. Does any counselors have any questions? I see Councilor McGivern.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff, welcome. And I did make the motion at the full city council meeting to ask that this appointment come into the Public Service Committee, not because I'm not familiar with your resume and your background. And like Jim, I did talk to the chief. He highly recommends you. We've seen you in action with the Fire Commission. We know you've got what it takes to handle these type of responsibility. And quite frankly, your resume reeks of emergency management, and everything you've done is something that is a big plus for the city of Holyoke to be able to tap into your experience and to tap into your abilities. We're also a little bit familiar, and I think a couple of us graduated from Holyoke Catholic, so the green and gold is always nice to have on back, right? I won't tell you.
Holyoke Catholic right here in Holyoke.
1973, Jim? For me? But I do have one question, but and I remember when ISO first opened up in Holyoke, we did get a tour, and we saw I couldn't tell you what it's like now, this is a while ago, but we saw the multiple boards and screens. It was like a movie that came out in the 70s where all of a sudden they purposely blacked everything out and said we were in an emergency. It was obviously a show. But my question is, you have a lot of responsibilities at ISO. And typically this job has been filled by a person who's a full-time employee of the city. Obviously COVID-19 is a little bit different, and your participation is already, and you already explained, why the mayor had Mike come in and do the full-time work. Can you handle, the positions, and can you handle this position, once it gets back to what we may call the new normal?
Yeah. So no, absolutely, and that was one of my concerns that I had raised, obviously, with the chiefs and the mayor and his chief of staff, and I think I've enjoyed acting in advisory capacity. I think the city is extremely well served in the current structure that's in place right now, handling COVID-19. And I've dealt with other pandemics. We dealt with H1N1, we dealt with H1N5. And I dealt with even the Ebola when I was out at MIT. We had international students, and that was a big concern for us. And I'll tell you, it's a textbook response is what we're seeing here in Holyoke. So I'm very, very just proud, and as a resident of this city, I couldn't be more comfortable with the way it's being handled. And again, in my professional opinion. In terms of the responsibilities, I've kind of been on call my whole life, and honestly, this would be a collaborative effort between, the chiefs of both police and fire department, the mayor's office, being a stipend position. It's not something that, I would be able to do full time. But it is something that I can definitely contribute to. And in those situations where it requires, a coordinated response, I can definitely, serve in that capacity and run the emergency operations center so that we can handle pretty much the gaps. I think that's the number one, contribution that emergency management makes locally. Besides the relationship building and the pre-planning and the hazard identification and that is really to do the things, fill the gaps, procure the resources so that the first responders can focus on doing their jobs, which is saving lives and protecting property. So that's that's really what expertise I can bring to the table. Obviously, if it was in conflict with my full-time duties, then I would leverage the expertise of the other first responders and chiefs in the city. But it's definitely something I feel that I'm up to the challenge for, and would like to have the opportunity to do that. I mean, I believe that my first order of priority would be to do an assessment of the city infrastructure from a business continuity standpoint, and utilizing available grant funds, utilizing available municipal funds, hopefully more grant funds than municipal funds, is to look at how we can make the city more resilient and agile, so that when we have a situation which requires us to be decentralized, like we did with COVID-19, we can deliver on essential municipal services without any type of disruption. So, that's the core mission. Obviously, dealing with the emergency response aspect of it, everything from building collapses to large fires, floods, hurricanes, even tornadoes. I mean, and we're not immune in this area. So, I've worked pretty much every type of incident, probably short of an earthquake or a volcano. So I can definitely bring that to the table and provide that expertise as required for the city.
Jeff, thank you. Your experience not only speaks for itself, but everything about you says you're a team player, and that's so important in this role. And you only have two things to add to what I've said, and one more important. Thank you so much for what you've said. One is, I think, I don't want Councilor Murphy to jump out of his chair, but I think we're going to have to adjust the stipend down the road to reflect what the city's getting out of your appointment. And two is, let's hope we never have to deal with a volcano. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Councilor. But honestly, it's not about the stipend. It really isn't. It's about serving my hometown, and it's nice to have a stipend, but honestly, I would do it for nothing.
Thank you.
Just remember that during budget time.
Councilor Lisi, I saw your hand.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being with us this evening, Mr. Trask. And yes, clearly you bring a wealth of experience and expertise to this position. So we're really grateful to have you. I want to see if I could just iron out a couple of conflicts that I'm having in my mind. Because as far as I understand, Michael Bloomberg, the mayor's chief of staff, signs all his emails as the emergency management director, and yet your appointment is to serve as the emergency management director. I understand that you are we're utilizing your expertise in an advisory capacity and like a meta capacity to do the large, planning, and he's more executing things on the ground. But could you speak a little bit more about what that relationship looks like?
Currently or the future relationship?
I think both, really.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So I think currently, like I mentioned before, again, this being a very unique incident that is in many respects unprecedented. I think we've all planned for pandemics. We've come close to having pandemics, but we've never had to actually execute those plans, thankfully, but unfortunately now. So, in the beginning, I was just providing general guidance on incident command, emergency management, kind of, how to access state resources and, different mechanisms in order to get assistance to the city. Very quickly, and rightly so, being focused on this full time, the chief of staff, along with other staff members in the mayor's office, have really stepped up to that challenge and are really triaging issues on a day-to-day basis, which really is necessary in an incident like this. There's positions that are created, for large scale disasters, and they're either called disaster recovery coordinators or incident managers or incident commanders. And you hear that a lot in the fire service, right? You know, the incident commander is the guy, you know, the firefighter, usually a deputy chief or the chief himself acts as the, you know, as the person who's ultimately responsible in directing response. Well, for a pandemic, really the incident commander by the textbook definition is really health department, right? Along with, you know, the city emergency management. So, yeah, I think the number of resources that are being applied to this particular situation are appropriate. And frankly, they could probably use more, but they're doing a great job and an amazing job and putting in the time. I'm helping out where needed. I'm getting phone calls, you know, here and there and attending, you know, meetings and just providing input as needed. I think going forward, as we transition, my impression is that this will be transitioned to somebody who is a disaster recovery coordinator, and that's the person whose chief responsibility is to continue to triage the issues that arise from this pandemic on a day-to-day basis, but also begin the process of coordinating all of the folks inside the city who can then get all of those receipts and those you know, canceled checks that will be needed in order to seek federal reimbursement. So that's you know, that's going to be a full-time job in itself, and is usually somebody who's brought on board for a large-scale disaster. So I think that's going to happen. Whereas I'll be still providing guidance, expertise, support, but also be available should another emergency arise. I mean, right now we're seeing hurricanes starting to creep up the coast, and you know, we had that microburst the other day. Thankfully, nobody was injured, and you know, the folks were placed. But again, it's you know, there's always emergencies, even though we have this kind of underlying condition of a pandemic. You know, there's still things that need to be responded to. So I would be responsible for assisting as needed with those type of events. So I think that you know, that's kind of the ongoing thing. And then once COVID-19 wraps up, you know, then I think you know, as part of the after action or looking backward at the response and at what we can do to further mitigate a situation like this, you know, and minimize the impact of a future, you know, pandemic should it happen again. That's really where I'd like to look into, you know, again, making us as resilient as possible as a community so that we can continue to deliver on those essential services.
Great, thanks so much for that. I do think that overall, like I really thought the city's response really seems coordinated out of, you know, the mayor's office for the most part, and the incident command structure that was developed. I personally have been like thrilled with the way the city's handling the response and really making use of like data and science. And I think we were really early movers in making decisions that work to the benefit of our city and the safety and health of our residents. So I thank you for any role that you played in that. Yeah. I know that you haven't yet done an assessment, like a formal assessment of you know, where the gaps are, and what I hear you saying is that something that you'd like to do moving forward in order to identify areas where perhaps we were not able to, or where we had trouble retaining continuity of service. But if you could, you know, what do you think are like what's the largest or top 3 gaps that you have seen so far? And again, it may be, you know, an off-the-cuff assessment because the data is not there to support it. But what would you think are like the top 3 things that we need to focus on to retain, you know, that resilience?
Yeah, I think it's the challenge that I think most municipalities are faced with right now, and that is primarily I think we're very accustomed to you know, centralized services, right? So you know, you look at like a city hall, it's one-stop shop. Somebody goes to city hall, they can take care of most of their business, you know, with the city. It's a forward-facing, it's you know, customer service building. With a pandemic, you pretty much, you know, you create this disconnect, right? So no longer can somebody go to City Hall and access their essential services. So, I think the gaps like all municipalities are having right now is struggling with things just like this meeting tonight, right? How do we continue performing essential city services in light of a situation where we can't gather together? So we are accustomed gathering together. We prefer to gather together. So it's looking at those processes and seeing if there's areas for improvement, so that next time it's like flipping a light switch, right? I think we've learned a lot. I think we've been creative, we've been agile, we've been flexible, and it's amazing, to see what people can do when they put their mind to it and work towards a common goal. And the city is doing an amazing job with that, as you pointed out, Councilor. I think my first look would be, are there things that we can do? Is there technology that we can purchase, or is there, a grant that we can apply for? Maybe even there, some of the funding that's coming out, to aid in the response for this. I'm already hearing grants coming through the emergency management pipeline that are going to be helped to mitigate against further pandemics. So, that's definitely something that I'm a strong believer in. You should be able to, so not only giving people at home a better way to interface with city government from their home, but also a better way for city workers to be able to access all of their necessary applications and resources so that they can do their job and give 100% and continue to deliver on services. So I think that's the first thing that I would look at. Just in general, you look at like some of the other, hazards that are a consequence of just the geography, right? So you've got, you got I-91 that passes through Holyoke, right? So you think about all the different, chemicals and shipments that come down, go up and down 91. So, that's always a concern, right? For a hazmat incident or, something of that nature. The age of our buildings, as we've seen twice already this year, notwithstanding COVID, we've had buildings that have suffered collapses or damage due to, one due to age and the other one due to a storm. So, those are things that I think need to be looked at. And are there things that we can do to mitigate, those situations before they actually happen? So, sometimes there's only so much you can do, but definitely being able to prepare for them and hopefully, direct resources towards the, the planning and response to those type of incidents. Goodness. I'm trying to think of other,
it was just an off the cuff impression. Yeah. And I know you don't have the data, but it's interesting to see, see the city through the lens that you have.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, like I said, I'm open to anything. I think my once all your questions are over, I think the question I would direct back to you, councilors, is what do you feel are the biggest priorities? So I'll save that till after your questions are finished.
Thank you.
Did you call me, Jim?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, thank you very much for your service so far. And if I can ask a personal question, is Mel your sister?
Is what?
Is Mel your sister?
Oh, Melanie, yeah. Yes, she is.
Yes. So I used to be her coach at Holyoke Catholic.
Oh, okay.
And
wonderful.
So if you're anywhere near the quality of your sister, then we know we got top quality. You tell her I said that.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, well, everybody says we look alike.
She worked to be the best she could be and was one very nice person to coach. So a couple other things. I'm glad you mentioned the buildings, because I've been concerned about buildings and what goes on. And also about trying to get a universal way that we respond. Now, in this case, I know we used Kelly School last time. Eventually, we used the War Memorial. I think one of my goals would be that we would, those kind of situations, that we would have an immediate place that we can go gather everybody together and then go forward. I know we've got access to the Kelly School. I know we got access to War Memorial, but if we just had one plan, then everybody could kind of center there and kind of deal with it. So that's one thought.
Right.
I don't know if you agree with that thought, but that's one thought. And then the other thing, and I know it was a bad storm, but I always have concern that, and that was the only two buildings that the roof came off, that are we in a situation, and you did bring up that we need to check out our buildings a little bit more, but, you know, make sure that our buildings are going to be strong enough to handle storms, because obviously we're old. And if we're not maintaining it, then we're lucky no one got killed with the bricks falling. Obviously cars got damaged, but cars can be replaced. So those are that I have. Obviously, there'll be other natural environment or actual weather issues and things along that lines. And the other aspect would be, if we ever had to evacuate, do we have an evacuation plan how to get out of Holyoke?
So I'll answer. I'll start with your first question regarding assets in time of emergency. So I was always trained in what they call the toolbox approach, right? So you got a lot of tools in the toolbox, and you take the tools out that you need in order to respond to the situation, right? Just like you would at home. So looking at the stock of resources and buildings that we can use as shelters is definitely important. Some people will say, okay, well, hey, tell me, if there's a storm and it takes out my neighborhood, tell me what shelter I'm going to, what road to take, and I thought, geez, you really can't say that because you don't know if that road's going to be blocked. You don't know if that shelter is going to be impacted. So, having, to your point, having a number of resources that are documented and identified in advance is always a best practice, right? We have a war memorial, we got the schools, and I'm all about like right-sized, response. So if it's only a couple people, and they're waiting, say, for placement in the hotel, and it's going to happen in a few hours, there's no sense in opening up the war memorial, right? I mean, you can take them maybe to the police station. They can, if it's in the winter, they can stay warm there until services come. If it's a small neighborhood, maybe you open up a smaller facility, right? And if it's a large amount of people, then you open up a school or high school or whatever. But it's trying to figure out what resources you have at your disposal in order to respond. Sometimes it's proximity, right? If people are on foot, you want to go to the nearest school or the near, So you have to work with kind of what you have and what's available to you. So I think to answer, back to the point about what is part of taking on this responsibility is really taking stock and inventory of what disaster response resources we have here in the city. In addition to that, I think to your other point. I think that when buildings, you don't know what you don't know, right? So and you don't know what the impact of a particular storm is going to be on a building. So you do the best you can. I think just taking stock and trying to figure out what hazards are out there. If there are buildings that are vulnerable, and keeping an eye on them or trying to work and become, try to figure out a way to hopefully mitigate that. And then your last question again was?
If you had some kind of, do we have a plan how to get out of Holyoke?
Oh, evacuation. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Hopefully we don't have to.
Plans. Yeah, I mean, same thing. You know what I mean? Multiple routes out of the city in case something is blocked, right? Multiple avenues of transportation. So, utilizing buses and whatnot, depending on what the situation called for. I still remember back when I graduated college, I was working for the city of Chicopee as their emergency management director, and it was right around the time the state had released their evacuation plan, their hurricane evacuation plan. And I don't know if you remember, been in Boston, you see those signs there that say evacuation route, right? It was right around the time those signs went up, and I ended up getting a copy of the evacuation plan. And I looked in it, and I noticed that Chicopee was one of the sheltering sites, because the thought was that they were going to turn all of the roads, the Mass Pike, Route 20, Route 9, Route 2, all one way, west. And any exit off the pike was going to serve as a because the Westover is going to serve as a shelter. So they never consulted with us on that one. And then when I was working for MEMA, I had to go into Boston a couple times, for meetings. And one time I just got lost. And I think it was right around before GPS came. Well, I didn't have it in my car either way, but I figured, I'll just follow the evacuation routes. And I figured I'd end up on one of the major roads. Well, I didn't. I ended up in Newton. So in terms of that kind of planning, I'm not too confident about getting out of Boston, but I think that, we can look, we're lucky. We have Mass Pike access. We have 91. We have a lot of main roads that go in and out of the city. So if we did have to evacuate, there are multiple options, and definitely something that we can, we can describe as part of our plans.
Okay, thank you very much, and I appreciate your service. And again, say hi to your sister.
Oh, will do, sir.
Okay, any other councilors have any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for your time tonight. I would entertain a motion.
I'll motion to confirm and appoint Mr. Trask to the Emergency Management Director position.
Libby? I see her mouthing second. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Sir, thank you once again for your involvement. I didn't realize that you were already consulting the last several months. So that's good to hear.
Oh yeah, no, my like I said, it's all about serving my hometown. So
Thank you
I'd
so
love to be able to
much.
contribute
Yeah,
back.
we appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, counselors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That's the last item on the agenda. Can we have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Motion
Make
to
a
adjourn.
Oh, go ahead.
Second. All in favor?
Second. Aye.
Thank you, counselors, so much for being on here tonight, and look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you, counselors.
Good night.
Night.